In this video, I want to discuss a recent kitchen equipment purchase of mine and answer the question of, was it a mistake? Namely, this carbon steel country fry pan from De Boyer. Or is it called De Bayer? Probably not, they're French. To be honest, this is a pan that I wanted more than I needed because I thought it just looked so cool. But there are a lot of things about it that I knew I could apply to a lot of things that I commonly cook. So I wanted to cook a bunch of recipes and see how it fares and try to answer some of the questions of what was I thinking and was it a good choice? So, making the Tell Us What You Made whole fish video, I bought this pan to shallow fry some small bait fish. This is a thing in my kitchen that I knew I was commonly lacking. And this pan was purchased by About to Eat. This is not an advertisement, and it wasn't given to us for free. The thing I probably most commonly shallow fry are zucchini fritters. You know, commonly cooked in about a ½ inch to 1 inch of oil. This is actually something I made in the How I Cook 8 Pounds of Zucchinis video. And so I'm gonna make that again today and see how this pan differs in the execution of that dish. So in that previous video, you would have noticed that I did not use quite as much oil because I was using this 10-inch cast iron skillet, which while plenty deep, doesn't quite have as much volume as this one. And even though you might not be filling this whole thing with oil, the fact that it's this generous bowl shape allows you to just have more confidence in moving it around. It's gonna make less of a mess. As the oil pops and bubbles, it's going to be contained within this pan more. And it has all of the same virtues as the cast iron skillet. It's very heavy. It's going to retain heat so that when you drop in those, you know, the 3rd and 4th and 5th fritter, once you get into the flow of it and you got the temperature dialed in, you're not chasing the heat to try to get it back to the same place. And I did find that with using more oil in this pan, I got a way more dark, golden, even, totally crunchy exterior to those fritters. It actually reminded me a lot of like a smash burger, where it has that lacy exterior, where the little pieces of dill and zucchini are really fried on the outside and you could see through it like that lattice. They turned out very nicely. Probably some of the best I've ever made. So, as suspected, after all, this is named a country fry pan. Should be good at frying things. This worked very well. The next thing I made was a steak. This is something I would commonly use my 10-inch cast iron skillet for. And I wanted to see if the country fry pan would be a good replacement for this skillet. So I could essentially eliminate this from my arsenal of pans. As I previously mentioned, this carbon steel skillet has a lot of the same virtues as a cast iron. It's very heavy, it needs to be seasoned with oil to become non-stick. You can get it as hot as you want. There is essentially no upper heat limit, but being carbon steel, it also has the advantage of inch for inch, it's a little bit more efficient in its weight. It's a little bit thinner, and these two pans do have essentially the exact same cooking area. Despite this being a 10-inch pan and this being an 11-inch giant bowl, the cooking surface at the bottom is the same, which is about 8 inches. If you needed to use a spatula, it might be a little bit more difficult because you have such high sides, you're not going to be able to insert it under the thing you're cooking, but using tongs, there's really no issue there. To be honest, every time I've made a steak in my cast iron skillet, it makes a giant mess. I mean, even more so than shallow frying, you have a lot of sizzling, smoking, sputtering, and any time that I seared meat in this, I'd pretty much have to hose down my kitchen afterwards. This one didn't contain 100% of the mess, but it was not as giant a mess as it would be with the cast iron skillet. There was also one notable advantage to the country fry pan, which was at the end of cooking my steak, I decided to baste it with butter. And with this much longer handle and the giant bowl shape, it was super easy to set the steak at the top, allow that butter to melt in the bottom, and then spoon it over the steak. I've always thought that this classic cast iron skillet is one of the weirdest shaped cooking tools that everybody just accepts as normal. But like this nubby little handle, it's not great. So the next thing I decided to make was a whole roasted chicken. Okay, so here's something about me and the way that I decide to buy things. Often I'll go to a brand's website and look through every possible variation of a product to make sure I'm not missing anything or there aren't any like hidden details or variations of something. It's actually what led me to find this pan in the first place. I was scrolling through De Boyer's website and suddenly I saw, what the hell is that? It's like a giant bowl-shaped frying pan. And that was actually the initial seed that was lodged in my brain that festered over time and eventually made me pull the trigger on this pan. But when looking through the website, one of the images they had was this pan, actually a slight variation of it where it doesn't have the long handle, it has two short handles, but it had a whole chicken inside. And I thought, that kind of seems like BS. It kind of looks like one of those magazine cover photos that looks great, but practically no one is ever doing. So I wanted to see if this would actually hold up. And I've never owned a traditional roasting pan, so if this could actually be a roasting vessel for me, I thought it would be a great addition to my kitchen. So in that product photo, they had some potatoes in the base of the pan, so I wanted to do that as well. I was also really concerned that because this is such a deep pan, it would inhibit the browning of the chicken. Because if you want an evenly golden chicken, you do need the hot air in the oven to flow around it. And if it's too nestled inside a pan, it could prevent some of that from happening. So those vegetables also serve to lift the chicken out a little bit. It's also just like the look of this pan. It's very evocative of like, I mean, even the name country fry pan, it's like, I'm in the French countryside, I'm roasting a chicken. Like, that's how I want to be living, with just my chicken in this pan. Honestly, that's a big motivation for how I choose a lot of things in my kitchen. They need to like spark something for me. I don't like pure utility. If it's a slightly worse choice, but it makes me want to cook with it more, I'm gonna choose that option. And so this pan with this dark metal, the stainless steel handle, the whole chicken inside, it was really doing something for me. The chicken was good. This is actually one of the better roasted chickens I've ever roasted. I don't know why, to be honest. It browned very well. It was easy to maneuver in and out of the oven, you know, despite having kind of a high handle. By comparison, I've used a different carbon steel skillet of mine for roasting chicken, but with the larger surface area of that skillet, you end up having the potential that as the fat drips from the chicken and it goes to the outside of that pan, it's going to reach a smoking point and make kind of a mess. With this skillet, with its relatively small cooking area at the base, it controls a lot of that, where the drippings are contained to a relatively small surface area, and you don't have that smoking issue. The next thing I made was leftover steak fried rice. This is something I was interested in doing with this pan because the way that I typically make fried rice is in my cast iron skillet or my other carbon steel pan, because this is how I learned to make it from Chef Motokichi. With the higher sides, it should be easier to toss and contain the fried rice. It's doable in the lower skillets, but it's a lot easier to make a mess. The other advantages are, of course, it's very heavy, it can get hot and maintain a lot of heat, so you're actually frying the rice the way it's intended to. I mean, traditional woks are also made from carbon steel. This also naturally shares a lot of the geometry and shape of a wok, so I thought this would be great. And should you treat your pan well, it should be sufficiently non-stick, although it does take upkeep. You could have a disaster, which I ran into the first time I made fried rice for this video, because we had just previously cooked something else and I hadn't adequately re-seasoned it. I think the rice was too moist, there was other factors in play, and it just didn't turn out well. So it can be very non-stick, but the non-stick has a tendency to be temperamental. Also, in my imagination, with this great big handle, this was gonna be a super easy pan to learn how to toss the contents of the pan with. But in reality, it's so heavy. I think it's about 5 pounds, but the thing to keep in mind is that it's 5 pounds at the end of a handle, which really exaggerates the feeling of how heavy it is and your ability to actually throw things around. So the fried rice, once I got it down, turned out great, but not necessarily better than other pans I've had. So the last thing I made was a quick pasta sauce. In particular, I made Amatriciana, which is something that I commonly make. I'm sure mine isn't the most traditional or accurate one, but this is how I've learned to make it at home where I live. The reason why I wanted to try making this pasta in this dish is because I was trying to recreate the technique of finishing pasta that I've seen in so many videos and shows about chefs who are great at making pasta. And that's at the final stage of the cooking process where the sauce has come together, the noodles are done, and now it's time to combine them and to agitate the pasta together so that with some of that starchy cooking liquid and the cheese and the sauce, it makes a beautiful final product that's going to cling to the noodle. And I've seen chefs use a more generously bold shape frying pan. Perhaps not quite as deep as this one, but certainly more than the usual low stainless steel skillets that I'm used to using. And so I was really excited for this pan to finally fill that slot for me, where I could have something that I could toss saucy noodles with reckless abandon and not have any issues. Now, the main fault, of course, with this pan is that it's a carbon steel skillet. It's relying on the seasoning, that carbonized oil, to protect it from acidic foods. And lots of people who are into carbon steel and cast iron will tell you that if your seasoning is good, you should have no issue making a quick sauce with acidic ingredients, such as tomato sauce. It could work sometimes. In my case, it totally didn't. And it stripped away the seasoning and messed up the taste of the sauce. It actually had a bit of like an iron minerality to it that I think came from the raw metal underneath the seasoning. And the reality is, like, even if your pan was super well seasoned, it's just not worth the risk of stripping away some or all of that seasoning just to make one thing that would be better made in a stainless steel pan of the same shape. Also, similarly to the fried rice, this pan with all of that sauce and pasta in it was so heavy and was actually quite difficult to toss everything together. Stirring was great. Everything was well contained. But the key failing point of it being carbon steel and not stainless steel made this a no-go for this whole category of cooking. I always knew that the carbon steel would not allow for this, but I was really hoping that finally I could live out my pasta fantasies of beautifully tossing noodles with reckless abandon, but this is not going to be the pan for that. So, was purchasing this skillet a mistake? Ultimately, honestly, yes. It was. While it's very good at certain things, it's redundant with a lot of my other pans. And the things I make most frequently, like pasta, this can't satisfy that need at all. And I would have been way better off finding this same shape of pan in stainless steel. So ultimately, I made the mistake that I always make, which is buying the more obscure version of something that I think looks really cool, but ultimately is redundant. Well, I'm also curious if you have any regrettable kitchen equipment purchases, or if there's something that you thought you would never have a use for, but is actually your favorite. I love talking about this stuff. But anyways, thank you for watching.